Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today we are going to take a look at Transformers Earthspark, episode 14, or 13, or 15. Anyway, at the episode Bare Necessities. Now, on the one hand, this is an episode that speaks to me directly because it's about invasive species and ecology and taking care of the world around us, which is a big part of what I've spent the last 10 years of my life doing. And the episode overall, brilliantly well written. Now, if you haven't heard it already, there is a massive but coming. Is it the acting? No, the animators were spot on, the voice actors were spot on. Is it the overall moral of the show? No, it deals with some fairly deep, complex relational issues, and it deals with them well. It's not like the episode Missed Connections, where you actually had a questionable lesson on social morals. In fact, if I had to sum up this episode, this Bare Necessities episode, I'd say it would be about respect, responsibility, and how you deal with the unintended consequences of your actions, how to deal with something when somebody does something out of the goodness of their heart and it backfires spectacularly and makes your life more difficult. And for the most part, overall, the main themes of this episode are really good. And I am sure you can all still hear that but in the back of my voice. Long and short of it is this. I think this show, that Transformers Earthspark, went a little too far with the concept of inserting adult humor into a children's show. And I'm just not certain that I can in all good conscience recommend this to families with children of the age of the show's target audience because of that. However, I'm trying not to be too reactionary or prudish. This is the kind of joke that will go clean over most kids' heads, and even if you're an adult, you might not recognize the reference that the show is making here. But on the other hand, it is a prolonged battle sequence, not just a one-off joke like it was in previous episodes. But anyway, let's talk about the show. Interestingly enough, we don't have an A plot and a B plot for this show. Instead, there are nearly half a dozen different story threads picked up at the beginning of the episode that all have to weave together into the conclusion. This is a really complex storytelling method to use on a show like this. So let's start off with the first thread. It's Mother's Day, and this theme runs through the entire episode. We start on that note, we end on that note. So you have the main theme of all of the Malto family members trying to celebrate Mother's Day in their different ways. Pop Malto is running around being useful, Robbie and Mo have done traditional Mother's Day crafts, and each of the Terran children use their knowledge, their growing knowledge and their innocence to come up with wide range of fascinating gifts. Now, these are really classic Mother's Day gifts. One kid did a diorama, they put on a play, they did a song and dance. It was a good, classic, wholesome Mother's Day episode, with the overall moral of that storyline being it's really the time you spend together more than it is any one physical gift. Then you have two majorly different story threads about responsibility, tying in kind of the Mother Earth theme here. And one is wild animals are wild animals and cannot be treated as pets, even if you are a giant robot. And this is illustrated through the most classic, do not mess with that wild animal. The densest city slicker who has never been out of even a suburban environment knows that you don't touch this animal. But a childlike alien who was essentially born yesterday wouldn't know that. So it makes the complication that institutes the main thematic ecological reference would be, in any other show with any other character setup, would be comically ridiculous, but in the show it is a good storytelling element because it makes perfect sense for these Terran children to be that ignorant. And in the course of solving that first problem brought on by this gift, we run into the second ecological problem, which instead of tying back to the Malto family, ties back to ghost. And the ghost element was odd, because the way this is set up, the problem that Ghost is causing should have been, in every other story, it would have been a problem of not malice aforethought, but a problem of apathetic greed. This was Ghost just not doing what they should have done, rather than doing something particularly evil. However, the plot twist cliffhanger at the end of the episode strongly suggests that this was something deliberate on Ghost's part. But that doesn't make sense because ghost operations have been shown to be fairly tight and controlled. And if the problem that they started was caused deliberately, they were putting out a situation that would be awfully difficult to control. But if it wasn't done deliberately, why did an episode this well written focus so much time on indicating that it was a deliberate action on Ghost's part? Then you have this natural disaster that is beginning to develop that has references back to no less than 2 G1 episodes. The first, the most obvious one, is that episode where the Autobots and the Decepticons are duking it out, and I think it was Beachcomber finds the Golden Lagoon. I think that was the name of the episode. They find this wonderful natural resource, and it gets destroyed because of the fighting between the Autobots and the Decepticons. And I won't even call it the main conflict, but one of the 6 main conflicts of this episode is a direct reference to that. But this episode is also a direct reference to, I can't remember the name of the episode, the one where Cosmo goes back into space and comes back with a bunch of metal vines attached to himself, and the vines start growing and try to take over Earth. I consider it one of the first shows to deal with invasive species in, realistic for an 80s cartoon way. I reference that when I give my talks in the national parks. And anyway, it was good to see a callback to that episode. Then, of course, you have the stress of various characters being under to find the perfect gift. And you've got some good old action and adventure, and the animation on this show is just spot on. So that was all the good stuff. You had a very well-written show, so well-written that it avoided even the thing that's not really considered a problem, just an element of sequential shows like this, the A-plot and the B-plot, because there was just so many different story threads all coming together at the end. That's the good stuff. What's the bad stuff? Now, back in a previous episode, when Bumblebee was at the racetrack, there were some signs around the inside edges of the racetrack wall. Sponsors of this racetrack, a company who paid money to the racetrack to put their advertisements up permanently along the walls. This is something that happens in real life. And when you get these in a cartoon, oftentimes they're made to look kind of like common brands, but be slightly off. And at least one of them, I haven't gone through and looked at all of them yet, was a double entendre. It had a meaning that really only adults would get, and it would have gone right over the heads of the children. And in this episode, you get another one of those. And it starts off as just a very simple verbal gag that makes you roll your eyes if you're an adult, and most kids wouldn't even notice. Then we get into the climactic battle of the episode. And I'm not going to say what it looks like. I'm not going to say what it reminds me of, but we've all seen enough of the genre that this is homaging to know what was going for here. And the raw, inappropriate nature of the homage in this episode, this is a kid's show. And intentional or not, and I really think it was intentional, there was a fairly complex homage here that I really don't think belongs in a kid's show. And it actually made me question whether I should keep reviewing this show because of the brand that I've built for my YouTube channel. But I think that going forward, because anything I have an objection to is going to go right over the heads of most of the intended audience viewers, I figured, well, I'm going to make this review. I'm going to set it in the queue to be posted, and by the time it airs, I'll have finished the entire series, and have been able to decide whether this was just a one-off pushing example of the creators pushing the envelope a little too far, because we all know that there has, ever since the creation of children's media, there have been overly mature jokes in the media that goes over the kid's head, and you don't realize what was going on till much, much later. The classic example is an old cartoon. It was just after they turned to color, and someone winds up at Heaven's Gate, and 3 kittens in a wet bag show up. And that was one of the darker examples, but there have always been more enthusiastic examples of jokes that are meant to go clean over children's heads. I mean, you can go up and find entire lists of them. In fact, there are a lot of websites that have made their entire monetization model out of making those kinds of lists. And again, I'm pretty sure that what we see in this episode would go right over most children's head. But there is a monster that is comprised nearly entirely of tentacles, and it does get into a confrontation that overlaps with the Mother's Day theme. And I do think that the writers were aware of the conclusions that a certain proportion of their older fans would draw, especially due to the tongue-in-cheek verbal gag that happens right before the tentacle monster exposes itself in the fight. So I would definitely, before I suggested this show to anybody with children in the age range of the target demographic, advise that the parents watch this episode themselves to see if it is something that they don't mind their children watching. I'm kind of half believe that my parents would have let me watch it when I was in that age range, but like I said, this is a show that this is an episode that I would warn parents about, and not just for that issue. In this episode, there is a significant aspect of body horror, and tentacles bubbling out of flesh, and toxic chemicals mutating animals, and grubs screaming at people. It's a pretty visually intense episode all around, and even if you were okay with the jokes that will no doubt go over kids' heads, I don't think that all children in this age group, or even a minor majority of children in this age group, would be mature enough to tank the emotional damage caused by watching a bear's flesh ripple and bubble and then burst out into pulsating tentacles. So yeah, for this episode, if you're a parent and you've got small children who might want to watch this episode, be concerned. Watch the episode first. Make sure that you judge your children's emotional maturity and their sensitivity to grotesque imagery before you let them anywhere near this episode. So, what do you think, my wonderful viewers? Am I being ridiculous? Am I being overly prudish? Say, Betty, we know you've got your niche, but this is for normal people. Tell me genuinely, did anybody else watch this episode and say to themselves, yeah, I've seen enough to know where this is going? Or am I just reading, am I saying more about myself than about the episode? What is Ghost up to? Did Ghost deliberately plan to mutate the forest? Is this just carelessness? If it was carelessness, why was the director of Ghost watching things? Is she deliberately trying to pick a fight with the park rangers? There is just so much in this episode. I'll probably be digging into it for multiple videos. Like just the scene where Dorothy has to make the choice of how she responds to the gift that her child gives her is such a level of emotional maturity. I wonder how it could have possibly been written by the same person who wrote the combat scene with the bear. But what do you think, my wonderful viewers? Seriously, leave a comment below explaining this episode to me. I genuinely don't know what to make of it. Go check out the links below the video to get a copy of my book, Humans Are Weird, Let's Work It Out. A lot of creatures in my books do have tentacles, but hit that like and subscribe button, and peace out, my wonderful viewers.